Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I welcome you all in this lecture. Today in this lecture we are going to discuss three core things. Number one, what is surveillance? What is incidence rate? And what we learn about the prevalence rate. Okay. Along with these three questions of surveillance, incidence and prevalence, we are going to study why they are important. So briefly, what is surveillance? It is basically an ongoing systemic collection, analysis, and interpretation of health data, which is essential for planning, implementation, and evaluation of public health practices, which are closely integrated with time dissemination of these data. So, these are the three things: collection, analysis, and interpretation, which is meant for planning, implementation, and evaluation. Now, grossly speaking, surveillances are of two types. Number one, the passive surveillance. Number two, active surveillance. Passive surveillances are all those surveillances which are happening inside any, what you can say, hospital or registry databases, which are doing these phenomena on a routine base. Active surveillance are like in terms of any active project which is ongoing and people are trying to identify any association of a disease with a probable risk factor, are generally categorized under active surveillance. Now, the surveillances are most frequently conducted for infectious diseases, but in recent years it has become interesting to know that any congenital cancer, asthma, or chemical poisons, or injury or illness could also be ascertained using the surveillance tool. Now, the next part is what is incidence rate. Now, number of new cases over here. What we should specially focus on are the two values which are utmost important. Number one, number of new cases of a disease in a specified period of time divided by the number of persons who are at risk of developing the disease in a specified period of time. So this is called as incidence rate. Now, by calculating an incidence rate, what we are trying to do, we are identifying any probable risk factor which is responsible. So incidence rate is a measure of event. So it differentiates between non and disease to disease element, and hence it's a measure of risk. But in order to calculate an incidence rate, there are two conditions that need to be met. Number one, it should have a potential to suffer from the disease. I mean the value, the number of persons who are at risk should be eligible to come up in the numerators, and it should be time specified. Let me give you an example for the condition number one. For example, if we are studying a certain type of cancer and we want to say that a number of new cases of breast cancer in a specified period of time in any district. Now, the number of persons who are at risk would be females, not males, because those denominators have a potential to be included in the numerators. That's what is the condition number one. So, who are at risk of developing that disease. And similarly, it should be a time specified study. Number of new cases within a 1 year, within 2 years, within 1 month, or any specified period of time. That is what an incidence rate stands for. It always accounts for new cases. That's the core essence of incidence rate. So we need to remember new. Now, the next part is what is prevalence rate? Prevalence is basically a proportion. It is taking all those cases prevailable in that specified period of time divided by the number of persons in the population. So prevalence is generally used to ascertain the need of a clinical requirement, how much staff we are requiring in that locality. For example, the people who are living in any, what you can say, a disease affected area, and we want to study how many doctors, how many paramedics should be deputed at that region. So we need to identify the total number of affected persons in that area over a certain period of time. In case of any natural calamity, the people suffering from cholera divided by the total number of population affected in that region would be presenting us the prevalence of cholera in that area or any outbreak over here. So it will be helpful for the government as well as non-government sector to plan things accordingly. So, what is the relationship between incidence and prevalence? Now, the prevalence is equal to incidence into duration of a disease. So, if we know any two values over here, either we know prevalence, either we know incidence, we are able to calculate the duration of a disease. Similarly, if we know the duration of a disease, how long it's going to take, the disease course, and we know the incidence, number of new cases divided by the patients who are at risk or the individuals who are at risk, we can calculate the prevalence.